This is UIndy's Potluck podcast, where we host conversations about the arts. Etchings Press, a student-run publisher at University of Indianapolis, awards the Whirling Prize to a book each year that demonstrates an excellent and compelling response to a theme selected by students. The 2023 theme was Mythology, and in this episode, the student judges in English 479, Abigail Bailey, Emma Bond, Olivia Cameron, Camille Dobbs, Sierra Durbin, Amber Phillips, and E. Alexander Phillips-Hedge have a conversation with poet Elizabeth Kate Switaj, author of the winning collection, The Bringers of Fruit. Elizabeth Kate Switaj has worked at the College of the Marshall Islands in the Central Pacific since 2013. She is author of Supply Chain Problems and The Bringers of Fruit. Her third full-length poetry collection, At Ghost Depth, is forthcoming from Mouthfeel Press.
Welcome, readers. I'm Camille Dobbs. We are talking with poet Elizabeth Kate Switaj, winner of the 2023 Whirling Prize. She and her formerly feral cats live on Majuro Atoll, where she works at the College of Marshall Islands. We are excited to have this opportunity to talk with you about your work, The Bringers of Fruit. Let's meet the judging team.
I'm Abby Bailey.
I'm Amber Phillips.
I'm Olivia Cameron.
I'm Sierra Durbin.
I'm Emma Bond.
I'm Alex Phillips-Hedge.
Okay, let's get started. Welcome, Elizabeth Kate Switaj.
Yakwe from the Marshall Islands. I'm happy to be here.
Okay, so my first question was, did you have any real-life experiences that inspired any of the poems?
Yeah, I've definitely had my share of toxic relationships that went into this collection. Clearing up the question of Persephone's consent is a poem that came out of my own wrestling with situations I've been through where it was hard to place the extent to which I really could consent and the extent to which I was complicit with my own oppression, for example.
So my question for you is there a way to analyze The Bringers of Fruit within the disability theory lens? If so, in what ways?
Sure. In a sense, everything that I write already represents a neurodivergent perspective. You can connect the multiple moving layers and varied rhetorics to work like Janine Joseph's Decade of the Brain. But at the same time, it's been really challenging for me to think about how to make neurodivergence something that's overt and always present in the work without making it something fixed and commodifiable. That's actually part of why I would say neurodivergent instead of autistic. There's latitude to change and perhaps throw new malfunctions into changing systems. This is a way of thinking that Legacy Russell's glitch feminism has really helped me develop from something that's a little more inchoate. She's got a quote in her book from Black artist E. Jane's Nope. I am not grappling with notions of identity and representation in my art. I'm grappling with safety and futurity. And in The Bringers of Fruit, that idea comes back to disability in the second intermezzo, because there Persephone's receiving letters of support from women who have been monstered in the way disabled people so often are. And to me, that really touches on the kind of community that disabled people have formed, often online, through letters or electronic letters rather than through more physical contact.
Why did you choose Persephone's stories and the point of views you did? And were there any that didn't make it to the final piece?
Sure. So I have loved Greek mythology for a very long time, going back to elementary school. I think it was maybe third grade when we did the Persephone myth as the class play. I was cast as Hera, which probably says something about how my teachers saw me. But I really came back to that when I was working on my MFA in Poetics and Creative Writing at New College of California in San Francisco. So many of the modernist writers that we studied in my first semester there really drew on Greek myths. And that led me to learning about how there were different local cults and the multiplicity of some of these figures. So it was kind of a more mature way of understanding Greek myth. And the Eleusinian mysteries, which focus on Demeter and Persephone rather than Hades and Persephone, were particularly of interest then. And, for a really long time, I associated that renewed interest in Greek myth just with that more mature perspective that comes when you understand that the stories are not so simple or told in only one way. But then just a couple months ago, I was listening to the Blind Boy podcast, and he had an episode on Greek mythology and simulation theory. And he was talking about how he was reading Hesiod in the wake of his father's death. And he really made this strong connection between a kind of existential absurdity in Greek myth where suffering is essentially meaningless. So he made the connection between that and the experience of his losing his father just when he was coming to an age when he could start to have an adult relationship with his father. And I realized that was very similar to the experience I had because my father passed away literally the day before my orientation for my MFA, and I was 21 at the time. So I wasn't a child, but I still hadn't had that opportunity to develop an adult relationship. So really, the Persephone myth has been incubating in my head for a while. It's harder to say why it came out when it did. I think the multiple voices have a lot to do with the fact that I was reading a lot of Bakhtin at the time, and he talks about polyglossia. There have been a lot of one-off Persephone poems over the years that just didn't fit into this collection. Some that fit into better, or not better, but some that fit better with other projects.
Persephone's voice is written with complexity and emotion that makes her feel very real to the reader. What did you do to prepare writing in her voice?
So I read every piece of Persephone literature that I could get a hold of. Fiction, poetry, just whatever I could find. I think it helps with the voice that I've dabbled in fiction, mostly short stories and a couple novels that never quite reached the novel stage. I think there's a lot to be said for studying television dialogue too.
Throughout the collection, we see musical terminology such as intermezzo, choral prelude, and aria that create sections for the poems. What significance do these elements add to the poems, and what inspired you to write The Bringers of Fruit as an oratorio? And to add on to that, you mentioned that your class put on a play where you are casted as Hera. Do you have a background in music, and have you done theater outside of class?
I wrote most of this book while I was working on publishing my dissertation on James Joyce, and it really owes a lot to Finnegan's Wake. In a way, that's true also of the musicality. So when I was at Queen's University Belfast, where I did my PhD, my supervisor, Brian Caraher, often talked about the Wake as music. I tend to think of Finnegan's Wake as a long poem. And of course, music and poetry have a long and ancient history together. Um, so I was really primed to think about these two as going together. So here I'd written a lot of pieces that fit into this project, and putting them together using this musical structure created another layer of code through performance and another way of thinking about structure, because I do a lot of playing with that and playing with form in this work. Uh, I don't have as much of a musical or theater background as I would like to have. When I was younger, I would have loved to have become an opera singer, but I had no idea how to pursue that, and I had a really terrible experience in high school choir, so I didn't get the guidance I would have needed at the time. I'd been in all district choir in 8th grade. In 9th grade, my voice started to become very unruly. So I had this whole huge part in the middle of my range that I just couldn't sing. The choir director at the time thought I was just shy or misbehaving. When I returned to singing in my last year of my bachelor's degree, I started to find out that that experience of having a huge break point in your voice and your voice just becoming a little weird and difficult to control is actually really typical of the experience of somebody with a contralto voice. And, although I sing now and I actually live in a culture that's very musical and has singing at all kinds of events, uh, I have a very distinctive low singing voice. And I do still love opera, but I don't really have that background of putting it into practice.
So, what sort of sparked your idea to blend the myth of Persephone with modern technology?
Well, to me, myth is really only interesting if it's living, and technology is an easy shorthand for bringing something into today. I think the challenge with technology is that as soon as you include technology, it becomes dated in a way. But I also think that trying to avoid being dated can make a work less authentic.
So, sort of to follow that up and get a little bit more specific, what inspired the intersplicing of HTML into the work? Are there any other forms that you would like to try to bend and experiment with in the future, similar to how you worked with HTML here?
One of my ongoing interests, because I have a lot of different influences from different schools of poetry, is in how to bring really disparate rhetorics and styles together in a way in which they all retain their sharp edges instead of becoming kind of a big mushy pile. The HTML tags have actual visible barriers, so it's an easy way to represent that kind of attempt. All the HTML tags in the Bringers of Fruit are actually from the Text Encoding Initiative, which is something I learned about at the Oxford Digital Humanities Summer School. So the Text Encoding Initiative, it's a digital humanities community of practice that develops and maintains a standard for the representation of text in digital forms. So really in the same way that thinking in terms of performance added a layer, so too did thinking of the poems as manuscripts and representing them in this way. I guess it was a way of carrying the ideal of archival poetics into parts of the work in which I wasn't actually practicing the archival poetics. As far as moving forward, I've been playing a bit with Python and error messages, but haven't hit on anything that I really like. I do want to experiment a little with using Twine for poetry. So Twine is a software application that's typically used for interactive fiction.
Thank you so much, Miss Switaj. Listeners, we hope you check out The Bringers of Fruit and Oratorio by Elizabeth Kate Switaj. You can learn more about the 2023 Etchings Prize winner at our website, which we will link in the podcast description.
We thank you for listening to UIndy's Potluck podcast, which is hosted by students and faculty of the University of Indianapolis. We would like to thank our guests and the Shaheen College of Arts and Sciences. To learn more about UIndy's Potluck podcast and hear other episodes, please visit etchings.uindy.edu/the Potluck Podcast. Thank you for your support.